If you have an athlete who's an amateur athlete who has never done potentially any physiological testing, right? So as you
Mm,
said, you're a coach, you get this new athlete, I don't know, 27-year-old, 30-year-old, they maybe have
yeah.
some other sport background or maybe ran a bit in the past. How would you start moving towards understanding what their physiological demarcations are? Like, is the only kind of approach to put them in a lab? Or are
Mm.
there ways how you can work around and try to understand their um, kind of these lactate turn points without actually testing for lactate turn points?
Yeah, that's a great and a very important question, and something I do with all my athletes. I don't put any one of them in the lab because I work remote and online. Um, so I think it's super important to know that you definitely don't need to go to a lab to get sufficient zones for you and your training, because the fundamental principles of the three physiological zones, they do apply to everyone, right? But an elite athlete will have a much larger EC domain, and can have more nuance around their threshold regions, etc. But a beginner athlete, I think, can train pretty simple and uncomplicated, and shouldn't get too caught up in getting the right data or training exactly based on some specific numbers that are supposed to correspond to threshold, etc. Using the three zones, the easy, moderate, and hard domain, can definitely be established through using RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, either a board scale 6 to 20 or the 1 to 10 scale, and also combined with heart rate. So those two tools, I think, can be used regardless of sport, and together they give a very good picture of where you are at in your training, which intensity you're at. So there's a lot of tools out there, and the 5 zone scale that we use in Norway, it includes RPE and heart rate percentages that are supposed to correspond to the different zones. So what I do with my athletes is that I always use the 5 zone scale that we use here in Norway and that I've always used. Um, and I just adapt the percentages slightly based on the level of the athlete. And you start somewhere and you may fine tune those zones slightly. But what I think is just most important to remember is, what is the goal of today's session? Is it an easy day? Then it should feel easy. You shouldn't really have to look at your watch or anything. You should be able to talk and relax and look around you and not feel stressed or out of breath. And you should feel like you're running or walking fast, or right, combining running and walking, so that you can stay at this comfortable low intensity for a long time. Then you know that you are at a low intensity or below your first lactate turn point. It's not gradually getting harder the longer you go in the session, right? And then, so you have the easy training, and then you have maybe your hit sessions or intervals. Same approach, I think, can be used there. You use a combination of RPE or feeling and heart rate. And for higher intensity sessions, it may be useful to look at your watch and understand what the difference is between, say, 85 and 95% of heart and max, because this is where a lot of people have a struggle to get it right, because a hard session typically gets way too hard just because you're trying to compete with yourself. You want to run at a faster pace or push yourself harder. So then these end up being way too hard and cost way too much, so that you use a lot longer to recover from them. And this is what elites do so well. They control their high intensity or their interval sessions. And today, a lot of people call them threshold sessions because they are in this threshold domain or upper threshold moderate domain around 85 to 90% of heart rate max, and maybe an RPE on the Borg scale of 14 or 15. And a lot of people get like surprised of how comfortable these sessions should feel. But it is a practice and learning what it feels like to run at your individual threshold intensity, in this intensity where it feels comfortably uncomfortable. You're in control, but you can maintain the pace for quite some time during longer intervals. For example, you don't see this great drift in heart rate or breathing. You stay pretty much in a steady state, quote, steady state, throughout the duration of the interval. And it will drift a little through each interval, but you're not finishing the session with like blood taste in your mouth and gasping for air. You're finishing knowing you have another gear. And over time, you can get more minutes at this pace and maintain your physiological responses better. And this is how you get better. So to summarize, for a beginner, start just using 3 domains, really: easy, moderate, and hard. And most of the time, you're either going easy or you're having an interval session or a progressive run or a tempo run. And then you can try to understand what the difference is between moderate and hard. And you use the percentage of heart rate max demarcations in the 5-zone scale, for example, or a 3-zone scale. That is also actually used in the Norwegian system for youth athletes. There we have an adapted 3-zone scale to make it simpler. And I think beginner athletes can do the same.